Welcome to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the blacksciencefictionsociety.com website. And today is the July 1st, 2016 edition. Good weather here in Chicago. My name is William Hayashi. I'm your host for tonight. And tonight's special guest is Rod Van Blake. He's someone who I am personally acquainted with. And he's written, somebody's going to have to mute that. You are muted. Somebody I'm well acquainted with, and he's written an interesting first submission. He's the author of Ancient Illumination. Welcome to the show, Rod. How you doing, man?
Pretty good, William. Thanks, sir.
Oh, always a pleasure. Tell everybody where you're calling us from.
I am calling from St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Man, and see, that's not far from where I want to settle. I want to settle in St. Croix. And how's your weather down there?
It's nice. It's been in the 80s. It's been comfortable so far, waiting on the heat to turn up.
That's pretty cool. And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Chicago. Born in New York, raised in Chicago.
Uh-huh. And what part of Chicago?
North side, right by O'Hare Airport, and then I went to high school at Oak Park River Forest, west suburb, Oak Park, and I've also lived on the south side of Chicago as well.
You know, the Chicago chauvinist in me, considers all of that suburban living as not living in Chicago, but
that's why I asked people what high school they went to, but my first address was on East River Road in Chicago, Illinois, and I had 312 area code, so I actually lived in Chicago prior to moving to the suburbs.
Yeah. And now, when you talk about growing up here, about how long were you here before you may have gone someplace else?
That was actually the longest, as well. I was raised at. It was the longest place in one place. So grade school all the way through high school was spent in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. And since you come to us as a writer now, and I don't know how long you've been a writer. Let me ask you this: when you were in elementary school, high school, did you have any aspirations for writing, or did you have any experience writing?
Yeah, at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I think I wrote one short story as a child, but other than that, I did not write. So I had really, until I started writing this book, it was not like I had been writing for years or anything.
Right. And then, okay, so can we classify Ancient Illumination as like science fiction or fantasy or what? What do you call it?
It is science fiction, space opera. I'm looking at all the genres and subgenres. Would be military science fiction as well. First Contact. It's very science fiction, but I mean those are all the subgenres it would fall under.
Okay, and then what were your influences as you were growing up? Because I'm finding the more people I interview, the more likely their earliest influences, whether it be cartoons, movies, or TV, or comics, have a lot to do with where they end up starting out their writing career, whether it be short stories, novels, comics. What about you?
Movies and TV shows. Growing up watching Star Wars, similar Star Trek series, Space Odyssey, 2001, Alien, all those movies, all those types of movies and stuff. Watching that stuff and then later on reading them. Once you always hear the book is better than the movie, so I decided to start getting into the books as much as anything, and that's what I wanted to write.
Yeah, and you talk about wanting to write. Did that manifest itself like early? I mean, you mentioned that this book was the first book that you've tried, and you have one short story. When did you start thinking about seriously writing?
Put it down for a long time. I didn't really pick it back up until, I'll say, 2013 or 14, and then I was able to push through and tack on the final 20 chapters. of the book. Life kind of got in the way. I let life get in the way.
Well, sometimes things happen.
Yeah.
I probably never would have written at all had I never gotten divorced.
Yeah, well, similar situation. That's how I was able to finish.
Yeah. You have some extra time on your hands, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's do this. Since this is your inaugural novel, why don't tell us a little bit about just a generic overview. But I am curious about how you went about world building, and then kind of took a pretty long break. Almost a decade, and then came back to it. What was kind of like the basis for your original construct of your novel?
Well, the reason I think I was able to go back to it is I had already written out a vague outline of how I wanted the storyline to go. So if you imagine me mapping out from point A to Z, and B through Y is already there in vague terms. Now it's just a matter of me taking block A of my outline and then writing that out. And that's how I went about writing it, so that I was able to go back, even after taking so much time off. I'd already had like a play stopper of where I could continue working from.
And do you really do you think? I mean, it sounds to me like the space operas of Star Wars and what have you obviously lent itself to what you wanted to craft. Were these external influences, the things that you came up with? How much of an influence were they on you, or on world building? And then you also mentioned that you wanted to create your own universe. How hard was it to create your own universe, and were you consciously not trying to copy other things, or did you incorporate elements that you had seen elsewhere?
I had taken things from history and things that I found interesting, and as far as the world, it's right here in the Milky Way. So that took a little bit of research, since obviously I've never been to Saturn, but in order to have place on Saturn, I had to do a little bit of research on making up and infusing what I could learn, what it might be if we were on the surface of, say, Saturn. Because I have a military group there. And that research helped shape, well, what would it be like to be there? What's the makeup of the atmosphere? So obviously we can't breathe there. We need to have like extravehicular suits on and equipment. And the gravity is 10 times heavier, so how we go about maneuvering and getting around in that type of environment. Things like that. So,
yeah, no, because this sounds very, very much like it's a hard sci-fi novel, and then you throw, the space opera aspect into it. But it does sound like you're pretty methodical in putting this together. When you started doing your research, was that research, I mean, did you do that back in 2004? You started building up the foundation for the creative universe that you were putting together and going to inhabit?
I did. I would start Googling stuff, Googling the galaxy, what's the atmosphere makeup on Pluto, even though I know it's been downgraded from being a full planet to like a dwarf star now, but the atmosphere is full of methane gas, so okay, how do we get around that, and what can I use to make that an effectual part of the story? So yeah, my research started then, but I had to start piecing everything together, and I focused on a few places, but not everywhere. So of course there's room to go other places in the next couple books.
Yeah, and so it sounds like you're creating a series.
Yes. Yeah.
And you've got your story arc, and you kind of have a direction on where you're going to go. When you were writing the first one, when you first got started, was it? Tell us a little bit about that process, because some people go to school for writing, some people don't. Some people just sit down like my dumbass self, and knowing nothing about writing, and then deciding to write a book, and even I think that, what I did was, I don't know if it was arrogant, but I think I think that I thought more of what I could do than I did, or what I could have. But for you, when you sat down and decided, okay, I'm going to, instead of short stories, I'm going to do a whole book, what was the thought process in putting that big of a story together? And then how did you know when you first started that it was going to be a series?
I basically was thinking of one book when I first started out, and then as I got through the time, like I said, I'd written out a long timeline, realized that I had, as I finished the book, I still had a lot more of that timeline to go. So it fit in a bigger scheme of things. It started out with matter, basically. The forms of matter being gas, solid, liquid, and now I've also seen that there's plasma now listed, which is kind of an amalgamation of all forms of matter in one, because it's kind of gas, solid, and liquid. And then I thought, what if one of the forms of matter was simply light, because a photon is kind of like that. There's a unit to it. And then I thought, well, what if there were sentient beings made of light? And that's, of course, why I came up with ancient Illumination. Ancient because they're older than we are, and they come here initially to enlighten us when we're still co-magnet here.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just, so what would happen? What kind of interaction would that be? And obviously, regular men would be scared of being made of light. So that's kind of how it started.
And then as far as story crafting, some people put together the universe and populate it. Some people start out with an interesting character and then start building other characters to interact around them. What was your process like?
I was more or less, like I said, creating the situation and then building the characters around that situation. And then I had more or less just random names that would pop up for me. Some of them were real people, some of them are not. And then they would become a character in the book. And then I would say, okay, well, what would this person do in this situation if they were confronted with a being made of light in their caveman? Obviously, they'd be afraid. And then it just, you just embellish upon that situation and go from there.
Yeah, and I mean, prior to your, prior to your starting the book, you had done short stories. Did you take any formal training other than what we normally go through in maybe, high school and college on writing, on creative writing?
No. I think I've taken one class of English literature in high school, and I took one when I was in college, but I was a business major, so beyond that, I didn't have to take any more writing classes after that.
When I think of people like you and me, when I first started writing, I knew nothing. As you went along, was there anything that you researched above and beyond, like the information you needed to do the series? Did you seek out any advice, whether written or otherwise, on how to craft a novel?
Like I said, I took it. My thing was to break the storyline into manageable pieces. So I have other friends now that are starting to write, and they always tell me I can't write a book. And I said, yeah, you just break it down into smaller parts, and you should be able to work through it. And that's what I did. I broke it down into Roman numerals, and I would start with Roman numeral 1. I'd take that paragraph, which is written out in a vague way, and then I would just break it down and write all the minutiae in between in that one paragraph. And then when I felt that I was finished with that much of the storyline, then I would move on to the next block. So, and I knew it wasn't going to be, I'm not going to sit down and write out 300-something pages in one sitting. So I had to make it manageable. And the other thing I tried to do was my continuity and make sure that things lined up on page 102 that didn't conflict with what I had written on page 24, because I know, mainly I took it as a reader, my perspective as a reader, what did I like, and that's how I wanted to build the story. I wanted to make a story that had all the things I liked. I wanted action in it. I wanted the story to flow, and I wanted it to make some sense. Because science fiction, it doesn't all have to make sense, but there has to be an underlying explanation that kind of rationalizes what's going on. And that's basically what I paid attention to most while writing the book.
Yeah. And then, it sounds like you also were looking at your own self-consistency. I mean, a lot of the things that you talk about are things that are taught, but I take your statement that you wrote what you like to read very much to heart, because that's what I wanted to do as well. I wanted to tell a story that didn't have any cheap-ass memes, that didn't have any cheap plot elements where it was so obvious that this was put in there to gin up the story and not necessarily because it was good writing. One of the things I really object to, I've noticed it more and more in movies, is when people craft their characters, they tend to craft them with some flaw, some fatal flaw that they use later on to drive the story forward. Like, well, I don't want to give a light, but so I mean, it sounds to me like where your expertise came in crafting the story was just from a very logical basis, experiential from what you'd already read, and when you put the story together, can you give us just a little overview to when you sat down and said, well, I think I'm going to write me a story, what were you looking at in the big picture in terms of, how you were going to not only craft your universe, drop your characters in it, but, what was your thought process?
Reflective of a lot of things that I've seen going on in history and what's still going on today. It also was part of me crafting that story. The Kisan, which is a group of people who do most of the mining, which Kisan means stone people in Swahili. They're one of the main groups of oppressed people, and they've mutated. And after a while, just like with anyone, they get tired of being taken advantage of, and they're going to revolt. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of that is twisted into the story. Its history, the pyramids, Pharaoh, Egypt, Atlantis, are all elements which I find interesting that doesn't necessarily get the right. And I'm not saying my story will shed any light on it, because it is just a theory, something that I made up. But it's not always, as you can see in, what was it, God, He's just God's Among Us now, that they don't get portrayed in any type of accurate light. So that was all kind of twisted in to make sense of what had gone on before. And it's like a big what if. What if there was an alien being exiled here that helped establish all that, which may explain why certain things are the way they are. We supposedly discovered Pluto in 1920. Yet in the pyramids you can find the entire galaxy mapped out to a T with all the celestial bodies inside pyramids that were made 12,000 years ago. So it's just another what if. How would they get that knowledge when obviously they hadn't developed a telescope or anything that would be able to see far enough away to make out Pluto? It was just, kind of mysteries like that. That plays out. But
yeah, I mean, people use the plausible past or the actual past to create a plausible present or future. I mean, look at that Stargate franchise. Building on the entire Egyptian culture, and then bringing other cultures in, the Minoans and, you know, the Chinese and what have you. Was it, how important was it to incorporate Earth history? Did you do that for believability? Did you do that because, well, you know, like you expressed, you were interested in it? Or were you really building a plausible basis for your creative universe? Or maybe it could be all three. I don't know.
All three. I was interested in it, and I liked using it rather than the common mythologies that we all see in most of the mainstream stuff, because I plan on writing fantasy as well. And elves and dwarves and all that are cool, but a lot of them don't look like me. So both in science fiction and fantasy, what are they saying, that we're not going to be around at those times? Or so I felt it necessary to incorporate that stuff from my perspective and my what-if scenario. That made it more interesting to me, so I'm hoping others will find it interesting as well.
And so the you know, I'll just call it the African American aspect of it is essential to your writing, and probably I was going to say looking for an audience, but no, you hope to have as broad an audience as possible.
Exactly.
Excuse me. But it is, you know, the racial aspect of it, the older culture aspect of it, and the fact that much of what has been done in science fiction completely ignores anybody who's not white. It was important for you to bridge that, to cross that, to put the whole thing together.
Yeah.
Would that be fair to say?
That's fair to say. And not only that, not only have they been ignored, but the great thing is the foundation upon not all, but most of the stories out there come from people of African descent. Sumerian text, things translated, and the Olmec, Anunnaki, all of those, Isis, Iris, Osiris, all those gods and beings were African lore, but yet
Yes.
we don't always get that expressed in our entertainment, which is kind of crazy. That's why I purposely made the names of a lot of the groups of people that are named in Swahili, because I wanted that connection. And it I may not say exactly who is who within the book, each group of mutants, but everybody is represented. And once you read through the story, you'll get to see and recognize, you know, which group is who's being oppressed in which ways, and then you'll be able to see who I'm talking about.
And this was obviously important to you. You know, for some people, okay, for me, it was important to craft a really, really good story. And it happened to include, you know, it was a black-themed story in that black people were the protagonists in it. And you know, I don't know if I chose the easy way or the hard way by writing in our current culture. But what was important for me was to write stories similar to you about people who look like me, or at least people I grew up with. Because being half black, half Japanese, not a whole lot of people when I was growing up looked like me. Yeah. But it was very important to tell a story that included black folks who I grew up with. You know, they don't exist in the American lexicon. Black folks I grew up with don't exist because there is no such thing as middle class or upper middle class blacks in America's tapestry right now. You know, you have a media-driven perception of what we are in terms of race, and that did not fit my narrative. You know, the people I grew up did not end up to be rappers. None of them went into professional sports. I can't think of very many at all who ended up in Well, we had a couple who ended up in jail. But what I'm saying is, I got so resentful about picking up all these books, and I grew up during the golden age of science fiction, or just immediately after that. and like you, I didn't see anybody like me. I didn't see anybody like me at all. I didn't see, and then the backlash that really pissed me off was when Bill Cosby put together his last Bill Cosby show, where he had a black doctor marrying a black lawyer and having teenage kids with just regular-ass teenage problems or white problems. And people said, "Oh, this would never exist. This is such a stylized family. There are no families like this in America." And I'm going, well, in Hyde Park, that's all we had, in the neighborhood I grew up in. And so I started writing. I wanted to craft a story that was a protest. It was a protest against the status quo, but I wanted it to be just as good as anybody else's story. I don't want to give away anything about what I wrote, because I have a great punchline at the very end of my first book. But it encapsulated that frustration and a little bit of arrogance, like, well, you think that only whites or only white-based science fiction is going to, or mainstream. Let's call it mainstream. I apologize for the racial thing. I got my own issues, but one of the things that I look at all of these people. I look at all of the recipients of these Hugo Awards. I look at all of these recipients of sci-fi awards. I look at all of the stories. I look at Star Trek, where the only black guy got killed off usually in the first 6 minutes wearing a red shirt. I look at, the unusual fact that Billy D. Williams played, a fairly important role in one of the most influential space operas that was ever done. And that's, he's a token, but he doesn't play it as a token. He plays it as a regular person, like the people I grew up with. And I just wanted to see more people like that. When you crafted your story and you wanted to go back and do your history, was it more from a more scholarly point perspective of saying, okay, these civilizations existed, they were quite advanced, et cetera, and they, there's no reason to ignore them? Or was it a protest like me, like, damn it, this happened and people have to pay attention? Or what were you thinking? What I'm trying to get at is where the genesis of, see how I did that? The genesis of your story really was.
It wasn't really a protest or anything. It was just, like I said, I took things that I thought were interesting and that would add more flavor to the story, more substance to it. So I would throw wrinkles from things. It was, like I said, it was a big what if scenario. So what if this is how the pyramids were built? What if this is how Atlantis came to be and why it wasn't heard from again? Just certain things like that, things that I want in there, and I like that you were in protest of what was already out there. I see that sentiment out there a lot, and I always implore other people, well then, don't complain about what's out there. Get up and write something. Write what it is you want to see. Put the faces out there that you want to look at instead of complaining about the faces that are constantly put in front of you, because if all we do is wait for them to give us what we want, we'll never have it.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, so how long, let me ask, how long has Ancient Illumination been available to the reading public?
February.
I'm sorry?
February. It's been out since February.
Okay, February, okay. And is it too early to ask, what, have you gotten any feedback yet on the story you crafted?
I've got some pretty good reviews on Amazon so far. A couple on Goodreads and Barnes and Noble. I've got some good feedback from the people that have. I don't trust too much my friends and family, because they'll tell you everything.
Me too.
So I want honest opinions, but I've got some really good reviews from strangers. So I'm happy, and I was listening to a podcast a couple weeks ago that Thaddeus House was on, where he was talking about supporting Black, and he said support Black when possible, which I thought was a really good sentiment. Not that we're just going to buy it simply because this person is Black, but also that their product is of good quality. Not only that, though, that even if it isn't, are they working to improve? Yes, that's what I want to do. I want my second book to be better than my first, and hopefully the critics, everybody can go out there and get the book. And if there are, I've gotten a couple criticisms on it too, and I want to hear that and listen to it so that I can improve for the next one and the books to follow that. Because everybody telling you your stuff is great, in the end, it's not going to help you at all. And I've seen that more so with friends of mine that did music than anything. And, a couple of, their friends at home sitting in the basement listening to it, and it's a bunch of garbage. So everybody is jumping up and down and nodding their head like it's the best thing since sliced bread. And it's not. You're not doing that person a favor. If the it sucks, tell them it sucks so that they can go and either find a different occupation or improve upon their craft, which I also thought was a good sentiment. So the reaction thus far has been good. It's really early, I know. It's only been out for a few months, but the reaction thus far has been really good. I'm happy with that.
And just between you and me, I do plan probably very soon picking up a copy because I want to see what you've written. I mean, we've talked through your process, as a matter of fact, how you got where you got. And I've known you long enough that I'm really curious to see the story that you turned out. And I think that is, I think Thaddeus's words are good, are great. Support where you can, but don't buy crap and try to sell it or tell somebody it's gold. I was very much like you. I did not believe, and I said it a little more starkly, I didn't believe what my friends told me about my manuscript because friends have emotional buy-in. Nobody, nobody really wants to hurt a friend. Probably like you, I didn't believe that I had crafted a decent story until I saw strangers reviewing it and saying that they did enjoy it, and that was very, I can't think of the word. Well, it was very satisfying to see that. And it also was encouraging because when I was writing the first book, I didn't know I was going to write multiple books until I figured out, there's a whole lot of stuff here that I can't tell. Because at the time, when I finished the manuscript, it was 750 pages long. Well, nobody's going to publish a book that long. And worse yet, nobody's going to read anything that long. So it had to be made a little more concise, and the story had to be broken up. When you think in terms of, putting together a series, what kinds of features are you looking at? Are you looking at making sure that each book can be read, and is contained, has a contained story so that you don't have to read the previous one or, if you read them out of order, it's going to be a big deal. You're very methodical. So when you plan out a series like that, what are the important things to you to make sure that each volume has and how they all fit together?
I want it to be a continuous story. I've already started working on the second one, and it's written in a way that it takes off from the end of the first one. So you will have to kind of read them in order to get things. And in between, I want to leave some questions in order to give you a reason to read the next one. That's the way my series will be constructed. I don't think I went through the hero's journey, but because it deals with different groups of people. So it's not one singular protagonist that you look at and watch him or her go through this journey and a call to action and all that stuff. It's just you hop from perspective to adverse perspective, with a few groups of people, and then at certain points in the book, they all converge. So that's basically how it's constructed. I'm not sure. I'm probably going to go more traditional when I move on to fantasy, but for this phase, because I was thinking of switching it up, but then I decided because I'd already written the first one that way, I'm going to stick with that style for this next book, and on to the third. So that's how this series is going to be constructed. It's meant to be read in order.
Okay, can we switch gears a little bit, because you've already got the first one, and it's out there for sale. Can we talk a little bit about how you have decided to market your work, and what things are you doing to get the visibility you need to try to build up sales?
Okay. Have you heard of the OEMnetwork.com?
I am not familiar with it. What's it about?
There's a bunch of different podcasts. I think they have 10 or 11 shows. They're based in Memphis. In particular, Black Nerd Power is one of the main podcasts I'm advertising with them. Of course, I'm on BSFS, advertising with them for visibility. I'm on those podcasts, 8 altogether. So basically 2 months worth of podcasts from Black Nerd Power. I'm also in Asimov's magazine, the Sci-Fi Mag, Asimov and Analog. I do Facebook ads as well for the Facebook page for Ancient Illumination, as well as Twitter at Keaton Ascari. I do advertisements there, so I put up banners online. I do a lot of this stuff myself and try and get the word out. But I have now started plugging into official online channels, digital magazines. The other one was, there was one more that I was in recently, but that won't be until October. And I'm trying to, that's the other thing, I'm trying to stagger the advertising so that I can see what gets more bang for my buck, so to speak. So I don't want to be in too many places at once. You can't be everywhere at once, but then if you are, you can't tell what's giving you the most results. So I'm also going to be in Shelf Unbound, which is a digital magazine for books in particular, but that won't be until October. Those are the different things that I'm advertising right now.
Yeah, and how did you go about choosing the places you are? There are some things that are patently obvious to me. I mean, I'm going to try to get the same kind of fall coverage in Asimov and Analog because they're handled by the same company. How did you go? And of course that's the perfect place because you've got your built-in audience, or at least the type of audience that you want right there. But what kind of research did you put in? Because it sounds like you put in an enormous amount of time trying to figure out exactly where to wisely spend your time and or money. How long of a process was it in the beginning for you to try to nail down where the most effective places would be?
Yeah, it's just about doing a little bit of marketing research. That was my major in college. And where you're going to find your readers, you're going to find them online. Either they like certain things or they search for certain things. So that's why the Facebook ads help, because you can fine-tune your demographic. I think it's from 18 to 65, male or female. And then it's all about putting tag phrases, science fiction, fantasy, all the subgenres I mentioned. And you can even nail it down to, say you have a certain book that you like, that's similar to yours, like the Stephen King, the Dark Tower series. You can put that in the tagline, and all the people that like that series will automatically be targeted for your advertising on, say, Facebook or Twitter. Locust is another another magazine. I want to specifically target science fiction magazines because to me that's like shooting fish in a barrel. That those are your readers. Those are the people that read science fiction are the ones that I particularly want. I don't want people that read romance novels because 9 times out of 10 they're not going to like what I write because it's not their style. Sure. And so I even looked at some of their own marketing research and what their customers look like, what their average person. So for Locus Magazine, their average customer is 45 years of age. They've been reading science fiction since they were 12 years old. And on average, their customers buy $2,000 a year worth of books. So for me, that's a place I want to aim for. So whatever it is that anyone else out there is writing, look for where your readers are. And Goodreads is another source too. I'm going to start advertising with them as well. Like I said, I'm holding off on some of the other ones because I'm still not going to see the results of this until like the end of next month. So I'll wait and see whether this, my return on investment is good to either keep investing what I've invested, or should I branch out and go to a different medium to find where the sweet spot is?
And do you, I call it the 80-20 rule. Do you roughly spend about 80% of your time in the business, doing business, and maybe 20% of your time doing the creative things like the writing, the crafting of the stories? Has it worked out that way for you, or have you been lucky to have, some other kind of ratio?
I'm not sure what the ratio would be. Right now, I'm more in the business side of things than anything, and I've kind of stopped with the creative process, other than visual, and I'm not really a part of that because I don't draw. So I'm currently working with other artists trying to bring visual concepts to my literary work because I plan on making this a graphic novel as well. For the folks out there that will look at the pictures but won't read the words, but we're gonna have some of that too. Yeah. But right now I've been since I moved out here from Virginia to the Virgin Islands, I've been more in the mode of business mode. More than anything, that's been the majority of what I've been doing now.
And someone in the chat room wants to know, is it difficult to write? You mentioned that you're going to have a multi-volume series. Is it difficult to write in that order or that structure to make sure that your story arc is consistent and flows smoothly over multiple volumes? Or do you feel the flow is easy enough and that you have in your mind segmented, the various blocks of the story so that there is a smooth transition?
It's easy if I keep to the blocks, and that's what keeps the story flowing in the same direction. Because I have a specific point to go to, a point of reference of where I am and where I need to go, and this is where we're up to. So I can't necessarily skip ahead. If I skip ahead, then I'll mess up. So I'm basically a slave to my outline. It's already written, so I've got to stick with that outline and continue the story at each step, and be careful not to skip steps or forget things. But that's what helps me keep it in order, help the scale and do what I want, then it makes me go crazy and it'll make the story go all right.
Talk a little bit about your discipline as a writer. When you're when you're in full-on writing mode, do you try to write every day? Do you, tell us a little bit about your process.
Finding a place to write is probably the most important part of my process, because once I find that, and then my rhythm will come. Back when I was still in Virginia, when I hadn't finished, and the house was a little too loud, I found putting my headphones on and going to Panera Bread, so no one could talk to me, and I would go, even if I didn't have anything on my mind, like, you're just going to go grab a cup of coffee, down at the table, open up your laptop, and you're going to write. And some days nothing happens, but more often than not, I had taken myself out of an environment that was kind of stifling my creative process, I found that I would come to Wednesday. I might knock out 4 or 5 pages, and each chapter I think is around 10. And I found that even if I didn't finish the chapter then, because it was already started, the wheels in my brain were already turning throughout the week. So Saturday, if I go, and by Monday, I would finish the other, 5 or 6 pages, and then I'd move on to the next chapter each week. And once I'm on that rotation, it's pretty good. So that when I was in my zone, that's what I was doing. I would go, I'd leave the house or find some place of solitude on Saturday morning, post up, open up the laptop, figure out exactly where I was in the storyline, and then I would go from there. And that worked out pretty well for a while to finish. It actually helped me finish my writing a lot faster than when I started.
Well, I mean, it sounds to me like your experience was very much like mine. The more I wrote, the more I was able to write. The easier it got, because just repetition made my process better. And also repetition made it easier for me to sit down at a strange, well, I didn't write that much in a strange place, but allowed me to sit down and get back into it, get my head back into it without being so distracted. I had written most of everything in my first book at my house, and then when I got to the point where I was going to do the heavy editing, I had to get out of my house. I had to get out of my living room, and then I actually put Wi-Fi in a restaurant so that I could go there and edit in the restaurant. So, I mean, at this point, are you seeing your processes as being fairly refined and easy to get back into? I mean, I know you mentioned the thing about keeping to your outline, but just the process of sitting down, getting your head in the right place, and being able to write, has that become much, much more easier?
It's become easier that I've created a routine, so now that I know what it is I need to do to get back in that rhythm. So from that, because when I first started, it was like crazy. I just wrote whenever it came to me at first. I would just get an idea, and that's how the book kind of started. Like I was telling you, with the different forms of matter and just coming up with different theories, and then it was all helter-skelter, but I could be in the middle of eating something, and then another idea would pop up, and then I'd immediately get up and go and start writing at that point. And then I figured I wanted to get something that was more of a controlled influence, so I could just kind of turn it on and turn it off. It still hasn't been perfected, but it has become easier to do once I found the right environment.
And okay, so now you've finished the first one in this series. You mentioned that you got a fantasy series that you want to start up next. Are you going to alternate, or are you going to kind of finish your first series and then go to the next series?
I'm trying really hard to just finish this series first and not alternate, because my fear is that things will become too similar, and I want them to be very distinct and different works. And so right now I'm all science fiction, although I do keep a list. When I do have ideas, I'll jot that list down, be it names or different groups of people that I want to put in the fantasy novels as well. But right now I'm not working on those. I'm only working on the science fiction.
Yeah. And do you have like a kind of a target date in mind when the second one will be out?
Sometime in 2017.
Okay. And what about the classification of your work? Is it suitable for young adults? Can younger people read what, you mentioned target demographics for advertising, but do you have a target demographic for your customers, for your readers?
Young adults can read it as long as they have a pretty good reading level, I think, because, and I did that purposely, because hopefully if they see some words they don't understand, it'll lead them to either Google it, the information age we're in now, or look something up that they don't understand. And there's a couple different languages thrown in there, like I mentioned, some of the names that people are in Swahili, group of characters in the book speak Japanese at times, so it'll be a bit much if they're too young, but I think young adults should be able to handle it.
Mm-hmm. Conventional wisdom says that you should write, space opera, sci-fi, this type of genre at a 6th grade reading level. Did you put any thought into how you crafted the story in terms of vocabulary, grammar, and whatnot?
No, I just wrote. I didn't have any of that in mind. I just wrote what I wanted to write and the way that I wanted to write, and the vocabulary. Some things I didn't purposely put words that aren't usually used. I think I used Roget's descriptive word finder for some of the words, just because I didn't want to use the same word to describe something over and over and over again. So I would find creative ways of saying the same word that hopefully, through contextual reading, eventually people will learn a new word for that color or whatever, description that I'm giving something.
I was just curious about that because I was told that I made a mistake, that I wrote too old, or like for ninth grade instead of 6th grade. I didn't know if other people even made that consideration, because I certainly didn't at the time. I was very much like you. I wrote what I wanted to read, and it was, I tried to make it accessible and easy for people to understand. Here you've gone and, you did make the calculation to try to make reading I think an accessible experience for kids, or at least teenagers, right? So that they, it would be interesting for them, but they could maybe learn a little bit, at least maybe some vocabulary, maybe some different concepts. From the feedback you've gotten, do people consider your story fairly accessible?
Yes. From the feedback that I've gotten, it seems that they found it accessible. No one has told me it was too complicated. From what I've heard so far, it's accessible. And as far as making it a learning experience, I think all reading should be a learning experience. I remember when I was a kid reading, when I didn't understand something, my mother always told me, well, if you don't understand that word, then you need to find out what it means to the concept. Go look at it.
Yeah, I was just about to say those words. Those were the words that I heard the most, in terms of my learning stuff. My folks always told me, go look it up. Look it up. Don't ask me.
Yeah, don't ask me, go look it up. Do something for yourself.
And so, in the creative experience, what does that do for you? Is this kind of a straightforward? Some people talk about they get a small high when they're writing, and the writing is in the groove or something like that. When you're in your process, obviously you're isolating yourself from your immediate surroundings if you're in a Panera or someplace like that, because they can be distracting. You got your headphones on. As you're in that process, is it a smooth groove for you, or do you sometimes have to struggle with reaching out and getting the right words and getting them in the right order? How has the process been for you? Because I found that it's gotten easier and easier and easier for every book that I've done.
It's a slow process for me because I'm not as anal about perfecting it. My main deal with the first draft is to get the work done. I don't know where I picked that up from, but everybody was like, get it done. Get it done first, and then worry about it being perfect. So when I'm in my zone of writing and just getting the story done, I'm trying to spit the story out. I'm trying to get it all out of me. We can go and perfect it later, but I want to get it finished and make the point that I'm trying to make. Now, if there's a more eloquent way of saying what I just wrote down, then we can research that later. But
no, I was just
There are certain friends that have different processes for their writing. They told me, well, I wrote the chapter and now I'm going to go edit it. And I'm like, so you're stopping in the middle after a chapter to edit just that one chapter when you could have written 2 or 3 more chapters at the time it took you to edit that first chapter.
Yeah, and I have heard the same thing that you heard, and that's what I do. You know, I want to get the whole story down, and then I'll go back and start looking at it. But I don't edit on the fly because I heard the same thing that you did. And when you're like in that groove, how many words is Ancient Illumination?
Let's see, the last, when I had it in words before I set it up to editing, it was something close to like 80,000 words, something like that.
Okay. And you know, I know it. You know, there was that 10-year gap in the middle, but start to finish, how long do you think it took you to do your first draft?
If there were one like continuous time, probably 2 years, 2 to 3 years, probably.
That's a pretty good pace for your first book.
Yeah.
And in your process, you said when you sent it off for editing, how much of your editing did you do first before you turn it over to somebody else?
The funny thing is, because of the time also that I had taken between, I went through and edited the first 10 chapters that I had before starting the next 20. So I'd edited the first 10 chapters, and then after I was done, I read through it again. And if I caught something really obvious, I'd change it, but I really didn't do that much after the first 10 chapters because I knew I was going to turn it over to people that just did that for a living. So I let them go ahead and do their job, and then I had another few rounds where I had to actually go in behind them and check their edit. And we went back and forth with that like 3 or 4 times, and I still think we messed up. But so,
all in all, your whole process sounds very, very methodical. and you know, going to college for business, that kind of implies that kind of nature. What is it, you know, do you think that your personality has evolved to become a more effective writer on the basis of your prior training, on the basis of your education, and maybe even your upbringing? What parts of your personality make you the writer that you are? Is it remembering, you know, the memory that you have of earlier space operas, the early influences? You know, what do you pull together? What is it that you think is the essence of your creativity?
Mine was, I think, all Black Heroin. All of my experiences have come into the fold, which the military is a big part of my book. And I was in the Marines for 4 years, from 97 to 01. I served overseas, and that's why I picked up Japanese, some of it, my first year in the Marine. So all of that came into my experiences as far as writing, because I have the Marines in the book. Growing up, my upbringing, my education, all of that, like you said, all of it is kind of put through the power stew of my writing. Obviously, all of those things are going to have some influence over it. As well as what I've read before, the movies that I've looked at before, some of the action sequences are based on things I've seen and read, and just with my own take on them. But yeah, all of that contributed.
Yeah. Hang on. You're listening to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the Black Science Fiction Society.com website. This is the July 1st, 2016 edition. And our special guest, my special guest, is Rod Van Blake, someone who I've known for quite some time. And he has written his, somebody lent me the word in the chat room, his debut album is Ancient Illumination, which is the first in a series. Do you know how many you're going to have in the series, by the way?
Well, right now, 3 is what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Trilogies seem to do well, so I think that's where I'm at, unless if I finish the second one and I end up having more of my grand outlines to me, more than one more book after that, then it may be more. Right now, so it's at 3.
Can I give you a piece of advice?
Yes.
Don't make the mistake that I did. You know, when my first book came out, right on the front of the book it said Volume 1 of the Dark Side Trilogy. So I was pretty screwed. You know, I had to do 2 more books. So, you know, if you can avoid that, then that way, if you think you're going to do a trilogy and then you find out, oh, I need a 4th and a 5th volume, you won't have made the mistake that I did. And that's my only piece of advice. I can't tell anybody else how to write or what's good or what's bad because everybody's got their own process. But have you networked? Have you worked with any other authors in the process of creating your own work? And if so, were they helpful or not? You know, in terms of helping refine process.
I have not. I'd like to, but I have not found anyone yet to work with in my literary endeavors. It's just me as far as writing is concerned. There were some author groups in Virginia, but I never hooked up with any of them. I had reached out. I don't know whether they figured out who I was or, you know, didn't want my kind wasn't welcome there or what it was, but I didn't get a very warm reception after reaching out over the internet, and then I just let it go from there. So I just continued to write on my own.
Yeah, and you know what? I admire that you've done it alone. I mean, you have done this completely alone, and your success is going to be yours to own. You know what I mean? You have done it all on your own, and you've done it methodically. I mean, every step of the way you applied, you know, some good reasoning. You did great research and things like that. And I have to say that I admire the way that you did that because not everybody has that kind of discipline or understands, you know, the process of how to create. So this to me is pretty remarkable. And you know, this is also another reason why I want to read what you've written because I know it's untainted by outside influences other than, you know, the ones that influenced you like space opera, Star Wars, Star Trek, things like that. So this will be an interesting read for me, and I will post a review. That's the kind of guy I am. But I'm from what I've heard about it, I'm anxious to read it. I have a great curiosity about how you crafted a story. How about people who know you? You know, have and the ones that you talked about, you didn't really trust their assessment or their reviews, but you know, you can at least divine how invested they may be in what you wrote or how they enjoyed it. Did you get any sense, even though you may not have trusted it, did you still get a pretty good sense of the fact that they might have enjoyed it?
Yes, I did. I have a really close relative that is really engrossed in the story and finished it, and they were asking me if I would let them pre-read the second one whenever I was done so that they could find out what was happening next. Which I also got the same kind of response, curiously enough, from the editor, which was kind of a double-edged sword to me because my editor made a big deal about the story, and even the first copy edit that came back came with a list of questions and things she wanted to know what would happen and was interested in how the story would unfold in coming novels. So that was like, I didn't know how to take that necessarily because I was like, well, is it good? Or is it the fact that I paid this person to edit the books and at the same time, this person person does nothing but read people's manuscripts. So to get that kind of response, possibly there's something to that. But on the other hand, like, you did pay them. So
suspicion much?
Yeah. So you gave them money, so I don't know if that means that they really like it.
Yeah, do they like it, or are they just shilling for some more work?
Yeah.
You know, there's a picture of you that was posted, or actually it's part of the promo for the show, and it appears that you either are part druid, or maybe are you into cosplay at all?
In that picture, I think it's the one I have a Sith robe on. I'm at Comic-Con in Tidewater, Virginia, the Tidewater Comic-Con, dressed as a Sith Lord with a lightsaber in that picture.
And you know, have you been to many of these conventions?
That was actually my first one. I lived years and years in California and never went to Comic-Con there, which I hopefully will be going next year. Right. But yeah, that was my first one.
And tell us a little. I mean, do you consider yourself, you know, the kind of cosplayer?
No. Actually, that was a Halloween outfit that my aunt had custom made for me because it's kind of hard to get stuff that fits me. 6'9", 340 pounds. So when I want costumes, I have to have it made. So. That was actually a Halloween costume, and I own about 4 or 5 lightsabers, so I decided that day too, when I went to Comic-Con on the first day, everybody seemed to be having fun kind of cosplaying, and I figured, well, this will probably be my only chance to do this, because the next time that I come to a convention, I want to come as an exhibitor, and the only stuff I want to be wearing will probably have my logo and Ancient Illumination stuff all over it, so it won't be dressed up as anybody else's characters. So I decided to take my stab at it for that day, the second day on Sunday. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and have you been to many? I mean, I know you didn't go into any in California, but what about locally?
No, that was my first and only one that I've been to.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then so I'm not going to have an opportunity to see you dressed up, huh?
Not unless you might. I don't know. I mean, I never say never, but I'm just thinking, unless I'm dressed up as one of my own characters, and of course my book hasn't been out long enough, because some people were saying, you should dress up as your own character, and I was like, but no one's going to know who that is yet, so it doesn't make any much sense unless they would.
But if you dress well, you know it generates curiosity. People go, well, who are you?
Yeah.
And then you have an opportunity to, you know, whip out that sales sheet and say, hey, I'm in this series right here. You know, it might be something to consider. Oh man, I had a brilliant question, and of course, because I'm old, it just blew out of my mind. Hopefully, it'll come back. And the more I try it, you know, that changes sales. Let me ask you this. When you think in terms of the next 5 years, you know, you'll probably have the full trilogy done, and, you know, by then, hopefully, you'll also have some cachet and some followers. When you start your next series, do you worry at all that your readers may be disappointed that you've left your universe and you've started a new one, or do you not even consider that at all?
I'm not really. I mean, basically, if it becomes super successful and people want more of that, then I'll continue writing that, because obviously that's what's going to pay the bills, but it's not going to stop me from expanding into the other genres that I want to write for. 5 years from now, hopefully I will have finished this trilogy, started the fantasy series, and I should have a couple comics or graphic novels for at that time, within 5 years, hopefully both of them out for the public as well.
Yeah. Are you thinking at all? Oh, I'm sorry. Are you thinking at all long term about the possibility of, you know, an animated series, or even maybe movies based upon your work? Have you thought about that at all?
Everything. screenwriting, I haven't started reading yet, but yeah, everything. I want everything. I want to do as much as I can with it, with my creation. You know, put it out there in as many different ways as I can, so I can reach as many people.
Sure. And I'm not trying to shill or anything, but are you, even while you're working on your own work, are you still reading other people's work? Are you still looking at how other people are crafting their stories, things like that? And do you have any influences, modern day influences, that you know are exciting for you to read, even though now you're a content creator?
I'm still reading. I'm still reading a bunch of different books. Not so much for influence, but simply because I enjoy their writing. You know, I'm in chapter 4 of the Discovery right now. What's the other stuff? Stephen Anderson, which is a fantasy writer. I'm reading a book of Fallen.
I'm sorry, a book of what?
Book of the Fallen.
Oh, okay.
And Milton Davis has a book, Before the Safari, which I think is a prequel to his Calendar series. I'm reading that. So there's a bunch of stuff that I'm reading. I'm still reading the Star Wars novels because they keep putting them out and they know Disney's taking over. I still read, which I'm glad I did, because I would have been disappointed if all that was scene was made of in the movie if that was all that was to him. I would have been disappointed. So hopefully they do more with that character in the later movies. But yeah, I'm still reading.
Yeah. And what about? Go ahead.
I was just saying, just because you're a writer, I think you need to keep reading. Because reading more will make you eventually a better writer.
Yeah. That is true. Sometimes I don't think of it that way, but yeah, it does kind of exercise your mind. In terms of your biggest influences early on. I mean, you said that you started reading very, very early on, and you started reading as much as you could. You were definitely into the Star Wars things. Do you have any authors from earlier on who you consider, influences in, your craft today?
R.A. Salvatore, Timothy Zahn, for the Thrawn trilogy. R.A. Salvatore more for his fantasy work with Trish Jordan, I think it's his protagonist, which was an interesting take because there was a black elf. But that's a whole other conversation. I don't know why his people had to be evil. He was the only good one among his people. But just the action in the series is what I took to Timothy Zahn as far as science fiction. When he broke down the military mind and his character, Grand Admiral Thrawn, and the way he advised and did things behind the scenes that weren't always obvious. But those are two authors that have influenced me. Unfortunately, Octavia Butler has her fingerprints in everything in the time. I think those are the
you're kind of dropping out.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can. Yeah.
Okay.
I have an opportunity because of Jarvis to sit in a panel or two at WorldCon where they do the Hugos, and one of the things that I want to have a discussion on, and I got to do that carefully so that I maybe get an invitation to come back. But one of the things that I do want to discuss is my perception that mainstream science fiction completely ignores, a fairly large niche group like black sci-fi and Afrofuturism. do you have any thoughts on why there's so not as much penetration into mainstream science fiction by more than the 5 notable black sci-fi writers that everybody names? Do you have any thoughts on why maybe we don't have the same kind? Well, I don't expect the same kind of coverage as mainstream science fiction, but it seems to me that the works that, like what you write and what I write, those sorts of people, Milton, you've got all these people who are doing all of these series, doing a ton of writing. Do you have any thoughts about why it hasn't reached more mainstream penetration?
Because we're told what will and won't sell. And the gatekeepers in Hollywood or wherever else will try and tell us what will take off and what won't. And 9 times out of 10, most of us will accept that answer, or just, instead of devising a way to put it out there yourself, you say, okay, you want a black captain instead of a white captain. That's not going to fly. And a lot of times people say, oh, okay, so either you change it up to match what they want, or they just don't put it out. And I think therein lies the problem. I think if we just continue to push, eventually something's going to break through. And it's slowly happening, and it's difficult to see sometimes if it's a legitimate entry, or is it, what some people will say is an agenda. You don't want to be the token black superhero. How about just being the hero that happens to be black, and I wrote him to be black, so he's black, and it will sell if you put it out there. And I think if we just all keep flooding the market, I think enough stories will finally get there that it'll penetrate. But right now, that's all I see is the gatekeepers telling everybody you can't have too many black protagonists. We've already given you 1 and 2, so be happy with that. And we can't have any women. We've given you 1 or 2, so just be happy with that. We don't need any more. And it's like, well, that may be what you gave us, but this one is mine. And I think this story is feasible, and if 1 or 2 people out there have the same perspective that I do, then chances are in the population of billions of people, there are more that would also find that story compelling. So I say, put this stuff out there, regardless of what anybody does.
Well, of course, and for damn sure, don't let anybody tell you to stop. And then the other part, you mentioned some of the influences that you had. One of the things I'm curious about is, do you think you're going to be doing any short stories, or maybe even guest authoring in other people's universes, things like that, or have you fully transitioned into really pushing your work forward?
Right now, I'm pushing my work forward, but if an opportunity presents itself for me to guest author, or if I get an opportunity to do a short story, I'm more than open to doing that. Because just like I thought, I say that reading makes you a better writer. Nothing is going to make you a better writer more so than continuing to write. So if I have an opportunity to write a short story that kind of helps me sharpen up my skills, then obviously I will take that opportunity.
And the other part that I'm kind of curious about is, what if down the road somebody comes to you and says, man, I so love your work and I've got some ideas, would you ever collaborate with someone else to either bring them into your work, or, to share some of your creative space with somebody else? Do you think that you have it in you to be a collaborative writer, or do you see yourself plowing ahead mostly as a singular creator?
I think it depends on who it was that approached me, and if I find that creatively we vibe and I like the direction of the stuff that they were talking about, then I would consider partnering up, and I think that'd be cool because, more ideas can create more dynamic stories. So if I found someone that we could bounce ideas off each other and it was working and we created some synergy and the story still made sense and would be feasible in the continuum of the story that either I had already created or if they want me to collaborate on something that they had created and it all works, then I'd go for it.
Mm-hmm. I do like the synergy that you have when you find somebody who you write, you collaborate well with. I've been invited to collaborate in other people's universes. One of the things that I would like to do is have a call for contributors who can do short stories within my universe, and then put that anthology together and see what other folks have in terms of their ideas to populate my universe. So I'm kind of excited about that prospect. That's a few years down the road, but it's still something that I'm looking forward to.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. What else? I mean, if you wanted to talk to people about your process, if you wanted to talk about something that you really found maybe surprisingly good, or something that surprised you about the creative process, do you have something like that you want to share with us? As you were writing, did you discover something that you did not know about either the process or your creativity?
The one thing is you can't force it. That's the one thing that kind of surprised me. It's like I'm determined to sit down and write, and I want to write now, and that doesn't always work. For instance, like I said, I let the process sort of just come to me. It's just a matter of putting myself in that place. Which that dynamic about my creative process is, I guess that's what surprised me most. That once I found that kind of mode, I had to get myself ready for it. And then once I was there, then everything worked. If I just sat where I was and said, no, you're going to do this, you're going to do it now, and nothing. Nothing would happen, and that would frustrate me. So that's for whatever works for you as a writer. I think you just have to find that zone.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
And then, do you have, how did you find blacksciencefictionsociety.com by chance?
Actually, through a friend of mine in Virginia, Vince White, was on there and introduced me to it. He had, I don't know if you've heard of him, he got his own comic book called Willpower. Yeah. We had met when I was working in Virginia. Funnily enough, when I was working in retail a few years ago, he was at the same place working retail. I phoned him, he said, I got a comic. I said, oh, really? I have a book that I'm writing. And he said, oh, really? So then we exchanged information and then met up a couple times and got to talking, and then through Facebook found BSFS, and then through milling around on Facebook found out they actually had a separate website. So then when I got to the website, that's when I got on BSFS.
Mm-hmm. And just generically, because I would like to ask, what do you think about a creative community like BSFS? What are the strengths, and if you see any, what do you think there might be any weaknesses to having to the community as it exists?
I think it's a great place because it is a place to go and identify as a black science fiction and fantasy creator in whatever art form you take, and as well as editors. Actually, it's a good resource if you're looking for that, and for whatever reason you want to do it with your people. I think that is awesome. Everybody should have that. So I haven't really seen any weaknesses, any reasons not to have that type of form to work and create and endeavor with other people with.
Right.
And there are creators there that aren't black, and I think that is good as well. So it's not really a double standard. So I like it.
Yeah.
That's why I like to go and chat with people and see what they're working on and what things that they're trying to devise, and kind of it's almost like a little support group that I see. So it's been a very positive influence when I first started doing things. So I like it a lot.
And one of the things that it gave me was I was introduced to it by someone in a writing group that I ended up in, and when I found it, it really was an eye-opening experience for me, because for me up until then writing was a rather singular pursuit, and then to see this community was mind-blowing, and to look at how much content there was. It's amazing how much content there is, and people who are, just brilliant minds, they're going in all different directions. I've never belonged to a group like that before, and I like to think that that I'm a better writer for knowing these people, and getting their opinions, getting their insight, seeing how they do things, looking at different processes, and learning from people who I wouldn't have met otherwise. So that turns out to be a great community for me. And then I have the added benefit of being very, very fortunate that I was given the opportunity to do this show, because then I get to talk to people directly. Otherwise, even though we spoke on the phone, I'm still learning more about you and your process than I would have. It's not the same kind of things that we would talk about when we talk about the creative stuff that you and I talk about, or crafting a story, or if something's good, bad, or otherwise. So it's a great community, and I want to see it grow. And your point that not everybody here is black is very important, because having an inclusive community is very important. Why should we impose the same kind of ridiculous nonsense that gets put on us all the time? And so
I like the inclusiveness. Yeah, I like the inclusiveness, but at the same time, it's in the title. You know what we're here for.
Right. Well, yeah, black themed science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Sure.
Yeah.
Today, well, you're in the islands now, and when you look at it, obviously it's a little bit different culture than you have here in the United States. Does that help you in crafting, crafting your stories and characters, having a kind of a more global perspective on humanity and the way people behave, and how their different cultures suggest themselves and maybe even rub up against each other?
Yes. Being put in contact with different people from different spaces, different cultures, will help you create better, more well-rounded characters. Because if you only have a monolith basic form of culture that you're constantly inundated with, then it leaves you with less material to build on.
Yeah.
Because in any way, shape, or form, they'll all be the same. Being out here now, I really haven't had a chance to write while I'm here, but I'm assuming that eventually, yes, it will start to influence my further development of other characters. And maybe even flesh out some of the ones that I already have, because the initial narrator in the story, a character named Babylon, he's not from the islands, but he's got like a island accent. So I'm sure being out here will help me develop him further as I go along in the series.
Something I'm curious about. when you craft your characters, do you pull them together from people that you know, or are you able to create them out of whole cloth without, specifically targeting somebody and saying, I would like them to be like this, or I like this part of it? How do you craft your characters? Because I was just thinking about that in terms of where I'm at in writing this current book. I have to create a whole community of people and how they interact together and what it is that draws them all together. Do you draw from your personal life, the people around you? Yeah?
I do. Yeah, some of the people in the book are people that I've actually ran into. Some of the names have been changed, some of them haven't. And some people I just made up. Just out of thin air, and then, like I said, create the situation, put the person in that situation, and then devise a thought of ways I thought that person would react to that situation. But most definitely, some of the people have been characters that I have walked and talked with in real life, and that those people in real life brought my character to life.
And then, being in the islands, what's if you had to point out a big difference other than the weather, especially the weather compared to Chicago in January or February, what are you liking about relocating there, whether it's, for a long time, short time, or whatever? Is there anything there? I noticed you mentioned that you haven't really written or anything, but what drew you to the islands? I know what draws me. I like the weather. I like the way that the taxing situation goes. And I want to get a big enough place so that people can come visit me when the weather's crappy up in North America. What are you digging about being down there?
I have family out here. My mom is out here.
Right.
Helping her with the business, and it was just a better transition than staying where I was. So, and it put me in a position to be able to market the book better from a financial standpoint. But it's laid back out here. It's real, which is a good thing and a bad thing I found when it comes to getting services. People here on island time, they don't, they may not move as fast as you want them to move because it's not an emergency on their end. So whatever the problem is for you, you'll have to wait till we get to it. So it is different. And the power is different. Sometimes there's power outages and stuff. It's different, but it's not too bad. It's enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you mentioned you were in the military, and you mentioned you learned Japanese. Did you spend time in Japan?
My first year was spent in Okinawa, Japan, and I visited Tokyo as well as Fukushima. Korea, I've been there a few times. I spent my first year was in Japan of my 4-year enlistment.
Yeah, and then what did you learn of, in your travels? Were there any takeaways that really made a big impression on you, or impressions that were completely unexpected?
For the most part, I just enjoyed the people in Japan, and kind of their perspective and their culture, and in some ways their regard for others was kind of cool to experience out there. But, just like they have problems, just like anyone else in the world has problems. They have racists just like we got racists on all sides. But the difference to me is they're about their money, and they're not going to let any of their prejudices mess with them getting money. So they can think what they want of you, but they're still going to come into their business and buy their services and products and whatever else it is. And while you do it, they'll be as polite as possible, even though they may be saying something behind your back when you leave. But, they don't let stuff like that get in the way, as some businesses do in the States.
Yeah. And all of that, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And all of that travel and the visiting of the different cultures, do you believe that has made you a better writer in terms of how you put people together because you've had more of a view of more than just one culture? You haven't lived in Bedford, Nova Scotia for your entire life, or Athens, Illinois, or what have you.
Definitely. The more you see, hear, and learn, I think that adds depth to your writing and what your writing can be, as opposed to someone who's seen very little. Because if you see little, you know little. If all you know about that same thing is that also can be as attractive to some readers to a writer, say, from Nova Scotia, and they moved away and you have a writer from Nova Scotia and you're writing about everything that they live and experience, but that's all they can write about. I'd rather have a wider range of things that I can write about. With my niche, I don't want my niche to be that small and specific. I want to appeal to everybody. So I think the more cultures you experience, the more things you see, the better you will be able to reach out to a broad audience.
Yeah, and I think you're very much like me, that you want your work to be popular in the mainstream. You're not looking just to have niche readers, correct?
That is correct. Do you like science fiction? I want you to read my stuff. Bottom line. I don't care where you are.
And what about have you thought about international sales, doing, putting together a marketing program so that you could get outside the United States? Or is it kind of premature to talk about that?
When I was setting up, I published self-published through Book Fuel, and that was one of the things that you need to check on the boxes when you're setting out, is would you like it to be U.S. or would you like it to be international? And off the top, I chose it to be international. I wanted others, wherever you are, wherever it's available, I want them to be able to get it. So I don't want it to be limited just to the United States. Because I'm trying to sell however many copies, and I don't, if you limit where you're selling it, it limits the amount of copies you're going to be able to sell.
True. And how important is, obviously the number of sales is important in determining how popular your writing is. But would you rather be known as a popular writer or a good writer? And I know the ultimately you'd like to be both, but if you had to choose, are you looking for quality or quantity? I think in terms of quantity,
I'd rather be good. I'd rather be good. If I had a choice between the two, to be really popular, to be really good, I'd rather be really good, because eventually I think if you're good, that will prove itself out, and the popularity will come. But if you're an oral writer and it just becomes widely popular, you may be popular for the wrong reasons. So
why did you have to bring up 50 Shades of Grey? Nobody here was talking about it's a terrible book. I think any book that you write on a BlackBerry is probably not going to be all that great.
On a BlackBerry?
Yes, she wrote most of that novel on her BlackBerry.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I know that. When you look at the trends in sci-fi movies, are you do you tend to be more disappointed, or are you optimistic in terms of what movies do? Because of course they're the most accessible medium out there. Even, I don't know if it's more so than comics, but they definitely have the marketing. When you look at today's sci-fi movies, what's your impression? Is it a positive one? Do you see good things happening, or is there some stagnation, which is what I see? What's your impression of what is the popular entertainment medium that is film?
It's positive because I take it for what it is. Pure spectacle, often lacking a lot of substance. But if I know that going in, then I'm not disappointed. I'm only going to be disappointed if I go in thinking that I'm going to get this real in-depth story with fleshed out characters, and on top of that, get a bunch of stuff blown up. When in reality, I know I'm going to go and see a bunch of stuff blow up, and there may not be much of a story. Well, if that's what happens, then the stuff that I see blowing up better be really good. So that's okay, this is probably going to be some hot garbage, but at least it'll look pretty. And that's
is that enough?
It's not enough for some, but I think for most, actually it is, and that's been proven out by the numbers.
Well, of course, when you look at the money,
the Transformers series obviously been enough because that's all that's been. They've been getting the licenses from stuff that we grew up watching as cartoons that are now all be made in the movies, and folks are eating it up, and they're complaining about it afterwards, but yet and still they're eating it up pretty much every time.
Yeah.
So that's where it's at, in my opinion, from what I've seen. I've also learned here that you have to go pretty quickly to the movies if you're into sci-fi and fantasy, or else it might be snatched out the theater if it doesn't do too well, I guess.
Yeah. I'm hoping for a movie deal or miniseries myself. And I'm entirely honest about that to other people. I deliberately wrote my novels in a very, very visual style so that they would be easy to translate into visual medium. And it is, I mean, it's not like I'm sitting here pining away over the fact that, oh, Dark Side isn't a movie yet or anything like that. But I'm kind of like your perspective when you talked about how you want to see, you want to see your entire creative universe become a transmedia thing, where it's offered up as visual art, as the novels, as the graphic novels, and then maybe movies or what have you. And I did that from the beginning because I thought it was best to try to have a plan in place, so that contingencies, when they came up, did not surprise me. You know how some people are not ready for their success, MC Hammer, and when they get that success, they don't have a plan, and disaster ensues. I think that anybody who's on the verge of doing well or having a breakout a moment, whether they be a musician or a writer or a filmmaker, should be forced to be tied to a chair for a weekend and watch every single episode of VH1 Behind the Music so they know what not to do. Do you have contingencies? Have you thought about what your success is going to mean to you and how you're going to manage it? Because you're pretty methodical.
Yeah. Yeah, from a business perspective, I have everything planned out. It's just a matter of having the resources to execute once success hits. I'll be ready when that day comes, and I'm sure there's going to be some surprises, but I'm not worried at all. If it would happen next week and I got the call, we got figured out. It's already in place. Let's roll. And I don't want to give up. My thing is, I wouldn't want to give up too much. That's the only thing. I don't want to give up too much of my creative process or creative onus on my work just for money. And I would rather keep more creative control, maybe take a little less money to be head of everything,
Well, that was my next question. Yeah, my next question was, what if Sony comes to you and says, I'm going to give you $10 million for the rights for Ancient Illumination because we want to turn it into a movie series? And this is assuming, of course, it's done. So you got at least 3 volumes out there. If somebody came to you and was going to give you $10 million for your intellectual property, how do you respond to that, especially knowing that once somebody options it and the contract is written that they get it, lock, stock, and barrel, and you get no say afterward? How do you feel about, the control of your intellectual property, or, in terms of somebody else wiring your creativity to market?
That's when we go into negotiation mode. How about we take a little less money and you give me, I stay on board as an executive producer, and we get this thing done right. Otherwise, it's not my creation. Obviously, it's important enough if that happens then they've seen value in what I've created. So,
but that's not how it happens. You know, about the only person who can really do that right now is Stephen King. Okay, because he's got that muscle. If you're not afforded that opportunity, do you retain your intellectual property and turn down the money because you really want to keep control over it, or do you go ahead, give them the option, knowing that you could always write something, you know, new and probably even better because you have more experience at it?
Yeah.
Can you let it go? I guess. It's a tough question.
It is a tough question. I think, honestly, at that point, depending on how much money it was, then I would, like you said, I would take it and start from scratch and hope that they stayed somewhat true to my original vision. But that's why I would try and stay on, because they don't really know what your true vision is. You know,
but guess what? Guess what? They believe that they do. You know, this is the arrogance of money. You know, when somebody buys an option, oh, well, okay, let's take Disney and Star Wars. All right? You know, George Lucas is completely out of the creative loop for Star Wars now, and Disney has complete control. And Lucas has said both things. He said, well, you know, I'm happy to let it go. You know, it was time for somebody else to take it over. And then he also said, well, I probably wouldn't have taken the next installment in the direction it went. So, I mean, even he has ambivalence. And I forget how much he made. He made go ahead.
That's his baby. So I think, he had to know that was going to happen, that he was going to, I'm through with it, I'm glad to be done with the headache, and then see something like that he's not approving of, so he's kind of stuck, because he can't criticize it too much, or it just looks like he's just hating, and at the same time, he has to kind of support it somewhat. But I can see that being really hard, seeing someone else take your work, but that was the reason I was trying to say, look, I would try and negotiate for, take a little less funds, and stay within the creative process of making the transition from book to screenplay or what have you a reality.
Yeah, yeah. And hopefully you know, I'm hoping, I always wish that level of success on everybody, because to have your, it is a wonderful thing, because you get to see well, first of all, your work is popular enough that somebody thinks that it's financially feasible and that it's attractive, and that's validation about your creative process and about, you know, the totality of your work. And then to see it brought to life, even through someone else's eyes. You know, there's the plus and minuses. They go, you know, that where you don't like the way they did it, but on the other hand, your work has now been made accessible to millions of other people. Plus, the very fact that your book became a movie drives sales of your book. So I see it as a double-edged thing. I would love to retain control of Dark Side if they make it a miniseries or a series of movies, but knowing that that's unlikely, you know, because nobody wants, you know, some opinionated Japanese girl sitting on the set going, whoa, you can't do that. But knowing that they would drive, that a movie would drive people to my books would be very satisfying to me, because most people always assume that the book is better than the movie, and when they see the original whatnot, that's validation for what I've done. We've got about 10 minutes left here. Is there anything else that you want to talk about your process, about your books, about your business model that you want to share with other people?
Just that, you know, it's my first one. It's my debut novel, and that I'm hoping to, you know, improve upon what I've done. So there's many people that like science fiction. I implore them to go give me a try at ancientillumination.net, and as always, be honest, and I also appreciate reviews. I'd also read, but never even start the work because they think it won't be accepted. And I say, don't worry about what you think will be accepted. Just put it out there. And that'll put you a step ahead of the majority of the people out there who just have ideas to sit on.
And you know
I'd like
what?
to see more of us out there.
You know, the technology that's available in terms of publishing has lowered the bar to getting published. And right or wrong, whether you write a good product or you create a good product or not, to what you said, actually sitting down and doing it has a much, much higher possibility of success, at least in getting it published, not whether it's good or not, than at any other time in our history, you know?
Yes. With the advent of digital self-publishing, within 4 to 24 hours, you can have your work out there and to the world. Which wasn't the case years ago, where you had to get one of the big publishers to sit down, look at your work, look at it and say, okay, this is a credible work and it's viable, we think people will buy it. And they had to give you their stamp of approval before you had any chance of getting it out there. Which today, pretty much anyone can get their work uploaded on the internet and it's out almost instantaneously without going through a gatekeeper. And like you said, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good, but it can be done in a relatively short amount of time and with a lot more ease. And that, to me, is the main difference between now and then as far as getting your work published. And you can still go to an agent and get published to the main people now, but they want you to come with a ready-built platform, which is now the biggest obstacle, I think, to that, which is kind of a catch-22.
Yeah, I was about to mention that. You know, the catch-22 that I always mention, which really pisses off agents, and I'm not exactly sure why, is that, you know, in order to get to a publisher, you know, at least one of the top 10, you know, you have to have an agent because they refuse to talk to authors. But in order to get an agent, you have to already have been published. So that's a tough hurdle. That's a tough catch-22 for somebody who's just starting out.
Yeah. And even at that, they want you to have, like you said, already published and already come with a platform of readers that you could show a certain amount of people that have already, you know, patronized your book.
Following. Yeah,
following. You need a following to bring with you. It's like, well, if I already have this huge following, what the heck do I need you for?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so probably the second volume of your series is going to be available in 2017, you know, early, mid, late 2017, do you know?
I'm going to say
already halfway. Yeah, as of today, we're halfway through with 2016.
Yeah, I'm saying late 2017. That won't be out.
Oh, and since my relatives are from Japan, when you were over there, were you the tallest guy there?
Oh, I was, yeah. I was, which was funny because they wouldn't stare at you directly, so sometimes they wait till you pass, and they stare at you from behind. Yeah, so my friends thought it was funny to walk about 20, 30 feet behind me, so everybody staring at me behind, and sometimes I would sneak and turn around real quick and would scare the crap out of them.
Here in the United States, the Japanese half of my family, they're all out in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, Oakland, Alameda, San Mateo. And it's funny because at 5'10", I'm the tallest one of my family. And that's, you know, that was highly amusing to me. My dad was, I don't know, he was probably about 5'7", maybe 5'6", 5'7". And it's funny about, you know, they are growing them larger in Japan and Korea because they have a more Western diet. Especially there are some big ass Koreans out there, but you know, it's funny how things like that make a difference because when you're over there, you're looking at them, you're looking at a new culture, you're looking at, you know, a differing way of people doing things, and like you said, 30 feet behind you, you're leaving a trail of people going, well, look at that, you know. So it's just fun to watch how different cultures rub up against each other. Let me just say this. You know, Rod, it's been a pleasure having you here. For those of you who are listening, I picked this up in the middle. This Rob Van Blake. His debut novel is Ancient Illumination. Excuse me. It is available on Amazon, and Rod is working to make this at least a trilogy, maybe even more. We're not sure. And I want to thank you for being here. This has been a great conversation. I had a good time. I hope you did too.
Much appreciated. I did enjoy it as well.
Yeah, and I'm sorry it started late. We had technical difficulties. Actually, we had to do a manual way of recording the show tonight because our platform TalkShoe was not behaving properly. Jarvis and I were trying to do things for that, and Jarvis is actually recording the show manually at his home. I don't know if Jarvis can actually get on and close the show like he normally does. We'll see if he pops on in a second. If not, I want to thank everybody here who listened to the show live. I want to thank people who picked this up as a podcast, and thank everybody for the support that they lend blacksciencefictionsociety.com, Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, and for those people who help sustain the cause with purchases of the Genesis anthologies and the magazine. Rod, again, thank you very much. I hope we'll be talking to you next year about your next installment. And yeah, and you know what? Hopefully, how long are you going to be in the island?
Not sure. It's undetermined right now.
Okay, because this winter, or maybe before this winter, I definitely want to stop down there and take a look at some condos because these Chicago winters, you know, I'm old. You know, like in white people years, I'm 187. And so I don't want to go through any more of these winters if I can help it. So anyway,
thanks for being here.
Yeah. I look forward to chatting with you again, seeing you online. For those of you who don't know, blacksciencefictionsociety.com has an events calendar where a lot of our members post up where their appearances are going to be. Plus, we have a chat room, and most any time of day except very, very late at night, there's usually somebody interesting there that you can talk to about your work, about your appearances, or anything else. So on behalf of the entire blacksciencefictionsociety.com family, and on behalf of Jarvis Sheffield, our peerless leader who created all of this, I want to wish everybody good night. Good night, Rod.
Good night, sir.